From Kevin's talk, it seems to me most of the action on media plurality is really in the European domain rather than in the local one. And I guess my question is, like, monitoring doesn't sound like good enough to me, I'm afraid, that people should be seriously thinking about regulation, just like data protection regulation at the EU level has come through in the last week or so. And I guess my question is to BAI and to the Minister is anyone really thinking seriously about that, or are we just waiting to see what happens?
Well, I mean, at the European level, we have the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, but I mean, I think, and that is under, I mean, that they're beginning a review process, which will take a number of years. But I think at a European level, it's very much seen as a national, plurality is primarily a national issue. It is about, because it affects the national regime, and I think what we've done in this jurisdiction, what the Minister has done in introducing the guidelines and the new piece of legislation, I think is a positive step. But I mean, we are entering into uncharted territory to some extent in terms of the regulation of other new media, other than the traditional ones. We regulate the broadcasting sector. We don't regulate the print sector or new media. So we are entering into slightly uncharted waters here. And certainly at a European level, there's no sense that even in the initial talks on the revision of the directive, there's no great sense that Europe wants to move into regulation in this area to any greater degree than it is.
Yeah, well, as well as having responsibility for broadcasting, I also have responsibility for telecoms, and I sit on the Telecoms Council in Europe, and I can just endorse what Michael has just said. There's a reluctance in Europe to enter into this world that Marie mentioned, the difficulty of, do we wait a little longer to see how things will change, how rapidly will they change, and what will be the connection is too weak a word. Will there be a convergence, of all of these platforms, the traditional media broadcast platforms in particular, and those that are internet-based and online? And how do we even begin to start having a regulatory framework like the man down the back suggested we should have? The competency for these kinds of issues has been national, by and large. Most of the stuff that happens in Europe, most of the discussion is about the bigger infrastructural questions, broadband. Although regulation of the internet has come up, people start to, well, how can you do it? Should you do it? There is an obsession, maybe some people might think it's well-grounded, an obsession in some parts of Europe, in the Commission and in Germany and elsewhere, with Google and with, what do you do with Google? How do you regulate these platforms? Can you take a bit of this, can you take them down a few notches, or what, And I suppose that to some extent is motivated by I was going to say, not anti-American, but the sense that, all of the action is over there, and there hasn't been a sufficient level of activity and development in Europe. So there's a little bit of that going on. But the new Commissioner Oettinger is very strong on the issue of Google. And I thought he was looking particularly closely at me one time when he was talking about Google and criticising Google.
He almost certainly
from the point of view of Ireland. But, so you can see the issues that are coming up.
I would think he was looking particularly at you and Ireland.
Staring at me.
Look, I know there are people who still have questions, but you're going to have to roll them over to the next session because we've run out of time. And in this particularly fraught but incredibly interesting territory, we really have mostly discussed platforms, but as Kevin alluded to, there's a whole other bit of work around the telecoms firms, who of course have the piping through which Europe, Facebook and Google is sent. And in America there's a nascent debate about who owns that piping, and whether or not at some point we'll be looking at two-speed internets, those who can pay to download Netflix in 2 seconds and others who have to wait for 2 hours. So it's an unbelievably difficult, transnational and multifaceted area which we've just touched on today. And for that I want to thank Mairead, Michael, Kevin, and a minister who could have ducked being on the panel and didn't. So thanks to Minister Alex White as well. Thank you.